Chapter 15 of Tales from Silver Lands. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Keith Gormley, Tales from Silver Lands by Charles Finger. The Hungry Old Witch. She was a witch. She was very old. And she was always hungry. And she lived long ago near a forest where now is Uruguay, and just in the corner where Brazil and Argentina touch. They were the days when mighty beasts moved in the marshes, and when strange creatures with wings like bats flew in the air. There were also great worms then, so strong that they bored through mountains and rocks as an ordinary worm makes its way through clay. The size and strength of the old witch may be guessed when you know that she once caught one of the giant worms and killed it for the sake of the stone in its head. And there is this about the stone. It is green in color and shaped like an arrowhead a little blunted, and precious for those who know the secret, because he who has one may fly through the air between sunrise and sunset, but never in the night. The old witch had another secret thing. It was a powder, and the knowledge of how to make it was hers and hers alone, and now is lost. All that is known of it is that it was made from the dried bodies of tree frogs mixed with goat's milk. With it she could, by sprinkling a little of it where she wanted, make things grow wonderfully. She could also turn plants into animals with it, or change vines into serpents, thorn bushes into foxes, little leaves into ants. Living creatures she also changed, turning cats into jaguars, lizards into alligators, and bats into horrible flying things. This old witch had lived for hundreds of years, so long indeed that memory of men did not know a time when she was not. Fathers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers all had the same tale to tell of how she had always devoured cattle and pigs and goats, making no account at all of carrying off in one night all the animals of a village. And to be sure, some had tried to fight her by shooting arrows, but it was of no use. For by her magic the shafts were bent into the shape of a letter V as soon as they touched her. So in time it came about that men would put outside the village in a corral one half of what they raised in a year, letting the old witch take it, hoping that thus she would leave them in peace. At last there grew up a lad, a sober fellow of courage, who said little and thought much, and he refused to take animals to the corral when the time came for the old witch to visit that place. When the people asked him for his reason for refusing, he said that he had a dream in which he saw himself as a bird in a cage, but when he had been there a little while, a sweet climbing vine had grown up about the cage, and on this vine was a white flower which twisted its way in between the bars. Then, as he looked at it, the flower changed into a smiling maiden, who held a golden key in her hand. This key she had given to him, and with it he had opened the door of the cage. So, he went on to say, both he and the maiden had gone away. What the end of the dream was he did not know, for at that point he had wakened with the sound of singing and music in his ears, from which he judged that all turned out well, though he had not seen the end of it. Because of this dream, and what it might betoken, he said that he would not put anything in the corral for the old witch, but instead he would venture forth and seek her out, to the end that the land might be free from her witcheries and evil work. Nor could any persuade him to the contrary. It is not right, he said, that we should give away for nothing that which we have grown and tended and learned to love. Nor is it right that we should feed and fatten the evil thing that destroys us. So the wise men of that place named the lad by a word which means stout heart. And because he was loved by all, many trembled and turned pale, when the morning came on which he took his lance and went alone off into the forest, ready for whatever might befall. For 3 days Stoutheart walked, and at last came to a place all grassy and flowery, where he sat down by the side of a lake under a tree. He was tired, for he had walked far that day, and found that slumber began to overtake him. That was well enough, for he was used to sleep under the bare heavens. But with his slumber came confused dreams of harmful things, which he seemed to see coming out of the ground. So he climbed into a tree, where he found a resting place among the branches, and was soon asleep. While he slept, there came to the side of the lake the old witch, who cast her basket net into the water and began to fish. And as she fished, she sang in a croaking and harsh voice this: "Things in the air, things in the water, nothing is fair, so come to the slaughter." They were not the words, but that is what the words meant. But unpleasant as was the song, yet it worked a kind of charm, and things came to her, so that her basket net was filled again and again. The fish she cast into a kind of a wicker cage, of which she had several. Soon the croaking song chased sleep from the eyes of Stoutheart, and looking down he saw the wrinkled crone in the great pile of fish that she had cast on the bank, and his heart was grieved for 2 things. One, that there was such a waste of good life. The other, that he had left his spear hidden in the grass. He grieved, too, a little, because he knew that on account of his long walk he was weak from hunger and thirst. So there seemed little that could be done, and he sat very still, trusting that until he was better prepared for action, the old witch would not see him. But all his stillness was of no avail. Looking at the shadow of the tree as it lay upon the surface of the water, she saw the lad's shadow, and she looked up and saw him. Had she had her magic green stone with her, things would have been far different, and this tale all the shorter. But not having it, and being quite unable to climb trees, she said, "You are faint and hungry. Come down, good lad, for I have much here that is good to eat." Hearing that, Stoutheart laughed, knowing that she was not to be trusted, and he told her that he was very well indeed where he was. So she tried another trick, spreading on the grass fruits and berries, saying in a wheedling voice, "Come, son, eat with me. I do not like to eat alone. Here are fresh fruits, and here is honey. Come down that I may talk with you and treat you as a son, for I am very lonesome." But Stoutheart still laughed at her, although, to be sure, he was a lad of great appetite, and his hungriness increased in him. "Have you any other trap to set for me?" he asked. Hearing that, the witch fell into a black and terrible rage, dancing about and gnashing her teeth, frothing at the mouth, and hooking her long nails at him like a cat, and the sight of her was very horrible. But the lad kept his heart up, and was well content with his place in the tree, the more as he saw her great strength. For in her rage she plucked a great rock the size of a man's body from the earth where it was sunk deep, and cast it at the tree with such force that the tree shook from root to tip. For a moment the old witch stood with knit brows. Then she went on her hands and knees, and fell to gathering up blades of grass until she had a little heap. All the time she was cursing and groaning, grumbling and snarling like a cat. When she had gathered enough grass, she stood up and began to sprinkle a grayish powder over the grass heap. And as she did this, she talked mumblingly, saying, "Creep and crawl, up the tree trunk on the branch. Creep and crawl, over leaf and over twig. Seek and find the living thing. Pinch him, bite him, torture him. Creep and crawl, make him drop like rotting fruit." So she went on, moving about in a little circle and sprinkling the powder over the grass. Presently the pile of grass began to move, as if it hid some living thing, and soon the grass blades became smaller, rounded themselves, and turned brown. Then from them shot out fine hair points, which became legs, and so each separate leaf turned into an ant. To the tree they scurried, and up the trunk they swarmed, a little army marching over every leaf and twig until the green became brown, and louder the old witch screamed, waving her arms the while, "Creep and crawl, up the tree trunk on the branch, creep and crawl, creep and crawl." The nearer to Stoutheart that they came, the louder she shrieked, leaping about and waving her long taloned hands as she ordered, "Seek and find the living thing." Then Stoutheart knew that trouble was brewing indeed, for against so many enemies there was no fighting. For a time he avoided them, but only for a time, and that by going higher and higher in the tree, crawling along the branch that hung over the lake. But nearer and nearer the ants came, and louder she bade them to pinch him, bite him, torture him. At last there was nothing for it but to drop out of the tree, for he had been hanging to the end of a branch, and the ants were already swarming over his hands, and some running down his arms. So he let go his hold, and went into the lake with a splash, down out of the sunshine, and into the cool green blue of the waters. He swam a little, trying to get out of the way before coming up, but he had to put his head out soon to get a breath. Then suddenly he seemed to be in the middle of something that was moving about strangely, and it was with a sudden leaping of the heart that he found himself in the old witch's basket net, being drawn ashore. To be sure, he struggled and tried to escape, but it was of no use. What with her magic and her strength, he was no more in her hands than as a little fish in the hands of a man. He was all mixed up with other lake things, and with fish, and with scum, and with water beetles, and sticky weed, with mud, and with wriggling creatures, and presently he found himself toppled head foremost into a basket, all dazed and weak. It was dark there, but by the bumping he knew that he was being carried somewhere. Soon he was tumbled into an evil-smelling place, and must have fallen into a trance or slept. Again, he may not have known what passed because of the old witch's enchantments, for when he came to himself he did not know whether he had been there for a long time or a little. But soon he made out that he was in a stone house, and through a small hole in the wall he saw that the place where the house stood was bare of grass and full of great grey rocks, and he remembered his dream, and thought that it was all very unlike what had really happened. But in that he was not altogether right, for while he was in no cage, and no twining vine with glorious flower was there, yet there was something else. For after a while a door opened, and he saw standing in a light that nearly blinded him with its brightness a maiden full of winning grace, and light and slender, who stretched out her hand to him, and led him out of the dark into a great hall of stone with a vast fireplace. Then, having heard his story, which brought tears to her blue eyes, she opened a lattice and showed him a little room where he might hide. "For," she said, "I also was brought to this place long ago. When I came, the old witch killed one who was her slave before me, but before she died she told me the story of the green stone which the witch has, and also of how were used the magic powders. Since then I have been here alone, and have been her slave. But now she will kill me, and will keep you for her servant until she tires of you, when she will catch another. And so it has been for many, many years, and each one that dies has told the power of the green stone to the other, though none has dared to use it." Now, hearing all that, Stoutheart was all for running away at once and taking the maiden from the dreadful place. But just as he opened his mouth to speak, there came to their ears the voice of the old witch. "Hide then," said the maiden, "and all may yet go well, for I must go get the green stone by means of which we may fly. With you I will dare. Alone I was afraid to venture." Even then he hesitated and did not wish to hide, but she thrust him into a little room and closed the door. Through the wall he heard the witch enter and throw a pile of wood on the hearth. "I have a new prize," said the ogress. "You I have fattened long enough, and now you must be my meal. One slave at a time is enough for me, and the lad will do. Go then, fetch pepper and salt, red pepper and black, and see to it that you lose no time, for I am hungry and cannot wait." The girl went into another room, and the witch fell on her knees and began to build a roaring fire. Soon the maiden re-entered, but running lightly, and as she passed the old woman, she cast on her some of the magic powder which she had brought instead of salt and pepper. The hag had no idea that it was the powder that the girl had thrown, and thinking that she had been careless with the salt and pepper, began to scold her. Then, getting to her feet, took her by the hair, opened the door of the little room in which Stoutheart was, and little knowing that the lad was there, cast her in, screaming, "Stay there, useless one, until I am ready to roast you." The maiden thrust the green stone into the hands of Stoutheart, and at once they flew through the window and out under the arch of the sky. And as for the old witch, the powder did its work, and she began to swell, so that she could not pass out of any of the doors. But presently the boy and girl, from a height at which they could see below them the narrow valley and the witch house, saw that the old hag was struggling to get out by way of the roof. The two lost no time then. They flew swift and high. But swift, too, was the witch. Her growing had finished, and out over the top of the house she burst, and seeing the escaping pair, began to run in the direction they had taken. So there was much speeding, both in the air and on the earth. And unlucky it was for the two that the green stone allowed those who carried it to fly only in the daytime. All this the maiden told Stoutheart as they flew. The old witch well remembered that at night there was no power in the flying stone, and was gleeful in her wicked old heart as she watched the sun and the lengthening shadows. So she kept on with great strides and leapings, and going at such a rate that she was always very nigh unto the two in the air. No deer nor guanaco could have bounded lighter over the ground than she did, and no ostrich could have moved swifter. When the sun began to drop in the western sky, and he and she were looking at one another with concern as they flew, the maiden bethought her of a plan, and scattered some of the magic powder on the earth. She rejoiced to see that the leaves on which the powder fell turned into rabbits. The sight of that the witch could not resist, and she stopped for a moment to catch some of the little animals and swallow them. So a little time was won for the flyers. But the hungry old witch soon went on, regained the time she had lost, and was under them again, running as fast as ever. So more powder was scattered, this time on some thorn bushes, which changed into foxes. Again the old woman stopped to eat, and the two gained a little. But the sun was lower, and they found themselves dropping ever nearer to the earth, flying indeed but little higher than the tree-tops, and as they saw, the old witch in her leaps lacked but little of touching them. Ahead of them was the lake in which Stoutheart had been caught, the waters red as blood with the light of the western sky. But the power of the stone was failing with the waning day, and of the powder they had but a small handful left. As for the witch, so near was she that they could hear her breathing, could almost imagine that they felt her terrible claws in their garments. On the bank of the lake, the last handful of the magic powder was cast, and they saw the grass turn into ants and the stones to great turtles as they passed over the water, but so low that their feet almost touched the surface of the lake. The power of the stone was growing weak. The old witch, seeing the turtles, stopped to swallow them, shells and heads, and that gave the youth and maiden time enough to reach the opposite shore, where the power of the stone was quite exhausted as the sun touched the rim of the earth. The gentle maiden clung to Stoutheart in great fear then, as they saw the old witch plunge into the lake, for she could travel on water as fast as she could on land. Indeed, the fearful old woman cut through the waters so swiftly that a great wave leaped up on either side of her, and it was clear that before the sun had gone, she would have her claws into the two friends. But when she was in the middle of the lake, the weight of the turtles she had swallowed began to bear her down. In vain she struggled, making a great uproar and lashing her hands and feet so furiously that the water became hot and a great steam rose up. Her force was spent, and the turtles were like great stones within her, so she sank beneath the water and was seen no more. Great was the joy of the people when Stoutheart brought the maiden to his home, for she became his wife and was loved by all there as the fairest woman among them. End of The Hungry Old Witch.